You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove and in part by JFQ Lending. All your home purchase and refinance needs should be handled by a Buckeye. You'll never pay for your appraisal with these guys. Licensed in 33 states and more on the way. Check them out at jfqlending.com. For the latest news, notes, analysis, and discussion, check us out on buckeyegrove.com and follow us on Twitter at UnscriptedOhio1. Now, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! Can we get some meatloaf?
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
Good Friday. Welcome back to the Unscripted Ohio podcast. I am your esteemed host, Kyle Lamb. We are here thanks in part to BuckeyeGrove.com, as well as our title sponsor, JFQ Lending. All of your mortgage and refinance needs should be handled by a Buckeye. So please go check them out at jfqlending.com and get in touch with your mortgage and refinance needs. Also, thanks to support by GoBus, Ohio's rural intercity bus system can bring you back to Columbus for Ohio State sporting events with over 40 stops and locations across the state. Visit them at ridegobus.com or give them a call, 1-888-95-GO-BUS. We are only about 8 days away from the start of the Ohio State football season, and I know many of you are counting down the days. We got a lot to talk about today. I was so excited. We decided to bring in my favorite fill-in co-host, Corey Thompson. I say that now, but I really should be sucking up to Johnny after blocking him last week. I'll say my second favorite fill-in co-host, Corey Thompson. Corey, what's going on, brother?
Well, it was my fault apparently that you blocked him.
Well, I mean,
according to your podcast. So.
You do put a lot of thoughts in my head. I mean, you do this kind of thing. You tempt me to do things to Johnny and pull childish pranks, and I go along with them because I'm a follower, not a leader.
Well, plausible deniability, my friend. That's why I do it.
Well, you're cruel to Johnny, and I should really try to be set a better example. But what can I say? I enjoy the laughs.
It sounds like a lot of hard work to set a better example, anyway.
Yeah, it is a lot of hard work. I'm telling you. I know you're a big boob at times, but who's turning in. See, I can't even talk now. You know who is turning into a bigger boob than you are? Jim Harbaugh.
I refuse to believe anybody's bigger than me.
Well, okay, he's getting close, and maybe you're just ahead of him just a little bit. But Jim Harbaugh is turning into a big boob. So I'm gonna set the scene here. So your favorite guy, Dan Wolken, on Twitter on Thursday, cited a book excerpt coming out from John U. Bacon, who, look, in all seriousness, before I say anything about John, look, he is a great writer. He's a good journalist. He does a lot of good work writing about Michigan football, Michigan basketball, but he's also a bit of a Michigan homer. There's no denying that. And, I'm afraid that this book looks like it's going to be propaganda. And within this book, they interview Jim Harbaugh. They interview Matt Dudek, who's the director of recruiting up there at the University of Michigan. And, Dan Wolken was quoting these excerpts that basically reads like Matt Dudek just essentially throwing everybody under the bus, accusing people of cheating. And my problem with this, and Dan, basically said, hey, look, this is more Michigan being Michigan. They're throwing the self-righteous stuff out there and, basically saying, hey, look, we don't do this stuff. Everybody else does it. And that's why they don't say this, but they're basically accusing everybody else of cheating and suggesting that's why they're not winning. First, I know, you don't like Dan Wolken very much. So you probably had a hard time nodding your head in agreement on this one.
I think we need to take an intermission in this show so I can go shower after agreeing with Dan Wolken because I feel disgusting.
I smell it.
I feel used.
I smell it over here.
It's bad. It's bad. The walk of shame after agreeing with Dan Wolken on something is something to behold. Look, I have to agree because I know Michigan has an arrogance about them. It's funny to me because they keep complaining that the media hates them right now. And if the media does, and if people do hate them, there's a reason. You're the reason, Michigan fan. You know, this level of arrogance is absurd. And you're right. To basically, well, look, we just play by different rules than everybody else. This has been the Notre Dame argument. You're not even using an argument that's original. This is you're copying the argument from Notre Dame. This is the reason why we haven't had more success. Essentially, is what you're saying. Is because look, we won't take kids who want money. You're dying on your hill there. You just like, I can almost picture like some dramatic scene from Shakespeare, Dudek acting out as he's trying to discuss with Dan Wolken about how above the fray everybody in Michigan is, according to compared to the rest of college football. They'll dive in the dumpster. They'll get in the gutter to do whatever they need to do to win. We're above that. Even though they're recruiting basically the same types of kids that Ohio State and everybody else is recruiting, or trying to anyway. The argument about education, the argument about we won't take kids with bad character, it's just giving me a headache to even think about.
You know, and this is getting to be a recurring theme with Harbaugh. You know, people can't tell. I'm getting annoyed with this because it's like, dude, you know, just take the L. You know, you're grasping at straws here. And Harbaugh himself in 2007, when he was the coach at Stanford, notoriously took a shot at Michigan because, you know, Michigan, just like everybody else, and let me preface this by saying Ohio State does this too. Everybody does this. So this is not unique to Michigan. But Harbaugh pointed out at Stanford, which is funny because Stanford does this stuff too, maybe not as frequently or as much, but they do it. But Harbaugh pointed out that, hey, Michigan will get borderline recruits, and they'll find ways to get them into the college, okay? You know, I should preface this also by saying, look, colleges won't just take anybody, you know, even if you're Clemson or Alabama. The admissions people don't like to take you just because you're a recruit. Now, they will find exceptions for you. They'll take advantage of special talent exceptions. They'll, you know, the football coaches will say, well, this guy has a mental learning disability, and they'll get you in as, you know, admitted into the college under that guise. You know, there are different kinds of ways that colleges will get you in, but Michigan does this too. And Harbaugh in 2007 pointed that out, that hey, Michigan will do this. They'll get you in, and then they'll throw you at a general major, just so that you can keep eligible. And you know, it's funny because he pointed that out 10 years ago. But now he's trying to say, well, everybody else is doing this and we don't do this stuff, which is baloney.
Yeah, you actually, I think, looked it up. You put out a tweet saying, look at the 2018 roster, I believe it was, and just like the first 18 or so you saw were like liberal arts majors, general ed majors, whatever, and you're still doing it, and you're going to continue to do it. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. We understand there's a lot of kids who go to these schools like Michigan, Ohio State, Bama, whatever. They're not looking to get the education necessarily. Maybe they should, but they're not there like, oh man, I really want to explore the history department or whatever, the English department. Whatever. They're there. I want to go to the NFL.
Yeah, I plucked out
having
16.
a heavy.
I plucked out 16 guys, just like you said. I just was looking down through the roster, just 16 people I plucked out at random and looked. And, you know, they mentioned enrolled in, you know, the College of, you know, Literary Science Arts, which is basically the liberal arts college. And the ones that declared the major, out of those 16, 6 of them said general studies. And those were the only 6 that had majors declared. So right away, basically, they're throwing most of their players at general studies majors. And, you know, I saw all I need to see in just a random sampling. And that's the thing. Michigan is doing that stuff. It's general studies now. You know, when Harbaugh pointed it out back in 2007, it was kinesiology or communications. But now it's just general studies. But the point is, yeah, Harbaugh is still doing it, you know, at Michigan. And they're still doing it like they always did.
Yeah, that's why when schools like this are bragging about their GPA and the football team, it's kind of like, well, that's nice.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like Craig Kranzel going to being a molecular genetics major. You know, it's not quite the same thing. Look, but when I know Ohio State's done this too, and they still do it, and they're going to do it. Every school's going to do it. Like I said, the NFL is the goal for most of these kids. Okay, I get that. I wouldn't belittle Michigan for this until that they have to come up and talk about the fact that they're just above the fray with everybody else. We compete with the blue bloods in education, and we compete with the blue bloods in football. How many can say they do that? And that's such a dishonest statement in the sense that like you just brought up, the football team is on a different education than the regular student body.
How long? We all know this is for the edification and the rationalization for the fan base. We know that's why he's doing it. How long will the fan base, let's say Ohio State goes up in Ann Arbor this year and beats Michigan and wins the Big Ten. And let's not put the cart before the horse here. That's not what I'm saying is going to happen. But let's say that happens.
Kyle just predicted it, folks. Go ahead, get them, pitchforks. Let's go.
I would like to point out that I am on the record actually picking Michigan this year. Don't beat me up for that, but let's say for a second that Ohio State goes up there and wins.
I'm leaving the network. I can't do this.
Let's say that happens, though. Okay, let's say Ohio State wins in Ann Arbor and beats Michigan again. How long can Jim Harbaugh, in your mind, get away with these kinds of excuses year in, year out?
I think the fan base, if they don't beat Ohio State this year, they're completely out of excuses unless it somehow comes down to a controversial call or something. Then we'll give them another year. It really depends on the circumstances. I mean, if they lose to Ohio State in Ann Arbor this year, and let's say Ryan Day, the Ohio State team is humming by then, they come out and they smoke them by 30 points in Ann Arbor, kind of like 2015. I think then the fan base is going to finally say, well, we thought Urban would be the end of it. No, Urban would be the end of it. We thought Ryan Day wasn't Urban Meyer, therefore he couldn't beat Harbaugh, and they have a new QB, and they came on the road and they smoked us. I think then a lot of fans are going to have the ceiling, or what they say, the mirror broken right in front of them, or the glass is shattered right in front of them, just like, something's wrong here. Harbaugh may not be the answer.
How long, you also, staying on the Harbaugh topic here for a second before we switch over. So you saw, we talked a few weeks ago about the James Hudson situation, transferring to Cincinnati and being denied his waiver. And, Harbaugh's stance was, well, we had nothing to do with this, even though Cincinnati is steadfastly, basically saying that Michigan is the reason why this waiver was, turned down because they didn't support it. Michigan obviously disagrees, but we had another situation. Miles Sims at Georgia Tech also got a waiver declined, and his family is saying the same thing. This was because Michigan did not support the waiver, and it's funny because Harbaugh, you brought this up on Twitter, and I thought this was a great point. Harbaugh brought up the point about having the conversation with Fickell as to why we told Fickell all this and if he's having a conversation with Fickell about James Hudson, then clearly he was involved even though he said he wasn't. And you have a second player now with his family accusing Michigan of denying the waiver. So it doesn't seem like Harbaugh is being completely honest here.
No, I don't think he is. And again, if for all Michigan fans that gripe about me on Twitter that I'm condemning Harbaugh, I don't think Harbaugh's necessarily even a bad guy. I think he's just wrong in these cases, and I think he's trying to cover himself a little bit in these cases. Again, it's normal human behavior. Pretty much all coaches have done this in one way or another. But nothing lines up with what he says. He says, I have nothing to do with it. Then why are you talking to Fickell if you have nothing to do with it? That doesn't even make sense. And then he said, well, that had nothing to do with Hudson, what I said about mental illness. Oh, really? Just a coinky-dink. You brought that up out of nowhere after the Hudson experience. Hudson's family doesn't seem to think so. Well, they didn't even tell me about it. He was having issues. His mother came out and said you had a meeting about it. What are you talking about? At every stance he's taken has been, at least with circumstantial evidence, or he said, she said, has been in question whether or not it's actually true. I think he's covering himself a little bit. I think he predetermined that he was lying about it, decided not to help the kid. That's what I think happened. And even though he's not in a position to be basically determining whether or not a kid's lying about mental health. And in the Miles Sims case, apparently his mother is saying that we said it was we provided documentation to the NCAA that it was about mental health issues or whatever it was, and then Michigan on their end claimed it was about playing time. So she's claiming that they're actually fibbing about what the document, what they came to them about. So, or they basically just made their own judgment that it was about playing time. So there's a complaint there. Now, does that mean every single case is an issue? No, but these two cases, clearly the family is disputing what the school and Harbaugh are saying.
Corey Thompson, co-host of the Scarlet and Gray podcast, joining me here on the Unscripted Ohio podcast. Next week, of course, it is a game week. We're getting ready to lead up to the coverage of the season opener against Florida Atlantic on Saturday. By the way, I will point out that I'm hoping to have a big preview roundtable with some of the staff over at Buckeye Grove, Kevin Noon, publisher, Kirk Barton, former Ohio State captain, as well as Ross Fulton, Buckeye Grove football analyst. We're going to get together and preview the season opener against Florida Atlantic, as well as the season as a whole. And I will also remind you that the Unscripted Ohio podcast will be going to 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, next week. And Corey and Johnny, Corey, I know you're excited about this. More work for you. Planning to go 2 days a week, next Tuesday and Thursday.
Boy, that's going to be a lot of fun. Now, honestly, when the shows are shorter, because they will be a little shorter, being 2 days a week, we won't have to cover as much right away. The shorter is, the easier it is to edit. When they're hour-long shows, it's a little bit more of a bear to edit. But that being said, I've actually enjoyed it recently because I think, not to pat ourselves on the back here, I think the Scarlet and Great shows have been pretty good lately, and I'm actually been pretty happy with them, and so it's okay to edit them. But I do like going to 2 days a week for the biggest reason is because the hamper on 1 day a week is when news comes out Friday. We can't cover it until until Wednesday, and it's like, well, like the Fields being a starter thing. I get it. It came out Monday, but I would have liked to have covered it immediately rather than wait a couple days on it. Stuff like that.
It would be much easier for me as well, not only to have our recaps. By the way, I know last year, if you listen to the podcast, Kirk and Ross did game recaps with us. We might be moving those to Wednesday and kind of have a midweek thing. I haven't decided how that's going to work yet, but it's probably not going to be. Ross is probably not going to be on the Monday episode here coming up this season. But one other note, of course, I've got Shane Larson coming up here a little bit later in the show. We're going to talk some college football. You're going to get to know him. He is, of course, going to be the host of the new Game Time, Gridiron Game Time podcast. That'll be coming up every week on Unscripted Ohio. We haven't decided on a day just yet. I think it's going to be Wednesday, but we'll decide on that here in the next week. But he will have his debut episode next week talking college football. Be sure to give him a listen, give him a follow at the Game Time Guru on Twitter. He's a really good follow. Guy knows his stuff. He's going to be enjoyable to talk to and listen to here on the Unscripted Ohio Network. And the week after, Chris Drew will be coming at you with the Dog Days podcast covering the Cleveland Browns. So we got a lot coming up on Unscripted Ohio. Corey, I tell you, I am very excited. People are going to have a little bit of everything to listen to here eventually. It's going to be a fun season.
This network's taken over, man. It's all the leadership of Kyle Lamb, everybody. That's an absolute fact. He has been putting this thing together for a long time. Ever since he came to Johnny and I asking us if we wanted to be on the network, he had a vision for this thing, and you're carrying out the vision, my friend. Congrats to you, man.
Well, I appreciate that. Speaking of visions, so I'm going to ask you, how do you see this Ohio State season playing out? Based on what you've seen and heard in spring or in fall practice so far, what's your gut feeling? What's your instinct on this?
I'm trying not to let my fanhood take over the more excited I get. I'm really looking forward to seeing Fields play. I'm looking forward to seeing a new look defense. I'm looking forward to see Dobbins going off like I think he will this year. It depends on how healthy they stay. Obviously, there's always that disclaimer, but I really think that it's going to start off with the kinks and the bugs. We're going to see some games, maybe in the first 6 games or so, that are going to be like, I don't know how far this team's going to go. They don't look that great at times, because I just think it's a new team and new coaching staff coming together. There's going to be bugs. There's going to be bumps in the road. And Fields isn't always going to look like a superstar. And by the way, I compare him to Braxton Miller. Braxton Miller, who's a Buckeye legend, obviously, had moments where you thought, should he even be the quarterback, because it was just going long spurts without even being able to move the ball. So I think there will be times like that with Fields where the offense just looks dysfunctional. I think the defense is going to still give up some big plays here and there as they try to figure it out. But I think towards the end of the year is when I think things will start to really click. We may have a loss by then, or maybe even 2, but I actually think I see us going back to the Big Ten title and defending the Big Ten.
It also helps, too, I think, the way the schedule is set up, because there is that somewhat early landmine in Lincoln against Nebraska, and that could be potentially a very tough game. People are split on that Nebraska team. I'm a little higher on them, a little more bullish about the expectations of Nebraska than some people are. But I also feel like the schedule is set up for Ohio State to where if they can get Fields into a rhythm early and maybe get past that first big test against Nebraska, there is a strong middle of the road schedule, but if they can get past those first 2 or 3 tests in early to mid October, I really think it's smooth sailing up to the Michigan game. I think it's going to be important to get by those first couple. And if he's ahead of schedule, I think Ohio State, if the defense is ahead of schedule, I think Ohio State's in really good shape from there.
Yeah, and everything you read, the defense seems to have its swagger back, or at least its confidence back. You listen to Damon Arnett saying, yeah, you just put a reset button on last year, the bullets are back. You keep hearing it over and over again. The offensive coach is saying, man, these guys are fast, they're flying to the ball. Honestly, if the defense performs as we know it can, that could actually get us through some of those early tests with the offense kind of trying to find its way with new personnel. Because, look, we said on the last podcast, Johnny and I, like the unknowns of the team. I know there's experience on the offensive line, but there's still 4 new starters. I know Bowen's not technically a new starter if he starts at right tackle, but he never started at right tackle. Wyatt Davis is technically a new starter. He only had a couple of games last year. Josh Myers, obviously. Jonah Jackson, who's experienced, but not experienced at Ohio State. Justin Fields, you don't know who the breakout receiver is going to be next to KJ Hill necessarily. You assume it could be Olave or Wilson. You don't, but we're hoping Victor comes out of his shell, and there's a lot of hopeful things there. Dobbins is good, but who's good behind him? How good is Fields going to be? And even how good is Yurcich going to be on the coaching staff? So it's a lot of unknowns. And how is Ryan Day going to handle being the head coach? Not everybody who's a good coordinator makes a great head coach. We'll see. So there's so many unknowns with the offense, but I actually, for some reason, have more confidence in the defense because I think that a defense can actually come together and be better quicker than a brand new offense.
It was kind of funny listening to Al Washington talk the other day because – on one, he was basically talking about the linebackers, and he basically came out and said, the 4 guys that got the most playing time in 2018 are going to be the guys they're expecting to rely upon here in 2019. And, the Baron Brownings of the world and Taraja Mitchells and some other guys are going to be in line to get a lot of playing time. But right now, the 4 guys that got the most playing time last year are expected to get the most this year. So I guess this is the catch-22 here. Does that mean, okay, that the blame can be placed on last year's defensive coaching staff for not getting the most out of that if the new staff thinks these are the best guys to be out there? Or can you also compliment the defensive staff last year that, okay, the talent wasn't the problem. They're seeing the right guys out there that maybe deserve to play, but they're not getting them in the right situation. So it's a catch-22. How do you view that? Do you look at that redemption for last year's staff or redemption for the players?
I look at redemption for the players. I think the very basic thing a coach can do is identify the talent that should be on the field. And I know we always get up in our uproar that the coaches are just picking the guys they find are the favorites and just loyalty. And I think that's true in some cases. It doesn't necessarily make it true in all cases. I've been hard on Borland, I'll admit it. But if this new coaching staff comes in and says, you know what, Borland really is the guy who should be the starter in the middle, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. They don't have any rhyme or reason they didn't recruit him. They don't have a reason to come in and say, well, I owe a loyalty to him. There's no reason for that. So if Borland's outplaying everybody else, including Mitchell, and I really am amped to see Mitchell play, then okay, then I guess I'm going to go with the staff on that. And Pete Werner, I've always felt, has the talent. He didn't quite show it at times last year. I still think it's a matter of scheme and fundamentals and things like that. But Werner is unquestionably very talented. I think he can be all Big Ten, to be frank. I think he's actually a candidate for breakout player of the year in the defense this year. And we all know Malik Harrison can play. We all know no matter what the staff did last year, going into this year, doesn't matter which staff it is, we knew Harrison was the best linebacker pound for pound on the team. So I don't know anybody who should have a problem with that. What I'm really happy to hear is you hear more and more, and I can't wait to see it on the field, is Baron Browning is starting to pick it up. That I'm excited about.
Well, Browning is an interesting case because it has never been an issue with talent for him. Last year he flashed the talent. He's got the speed. He's got the quickness. He's got the hitting ability. With him, it's just a matter of you could see it was taking him an extra second or two to really recognize what was going on in front of him and be in the right spots and react. And I think that is as much as anything else with the linebackers was the problem last year. Is I don't think the quickness was a problem. I mean, Tuff Borland was coming off a major Achilles injury, so we have to assume that was playing into a role in his explosiveness. But I think with these guys, it was more recognition and not being in the right spots. It was not a matter of not being able to get there as much as they weren't seeing things develop in front of them quickly enough. And I think that's what you're going to see the biggest difference with this Ohio State defense in 2019.
Yeah, I mean, like I always go back to the Maryland game because I was actually had a bird's eye view and I was there. You could see linebackers just confused as to which gap to take. They were sometimes running into each other, taking the same gap. I mean, it was obviously a factor of confusion rather than lack of talent. It's just, again, I bag on Borland a lot, but I do acknowledge in that first 10 to 15 yards, he can absolutely get to the ball. It's just if he has to chase you down, well, it's not always going to happen. But still, he has good instincts. He's intelligent. He is tough. I mean, pun intended for sure. I'm not totally thinking that we're making a huge mistake by starting him. But last year you could just see sometimes they just look confused, and I don't put that on them. That's on coaching every time, in my opinion, because if their coaches are putting you out on the field, they obviously believe you know what you're supposed to do. What are you doing to confuse them that they don't know what they're supposed to do? So I just think that the scheme, the system was way too complicated. I think that's been pretty much well documented by now. It seems like the new coaching staff is putting a huge emphasis on see ball, hit ball, react rather than overthink. We want you to fly. We don't want you to run like you're in mud because you're thinking too much. So I'm really excited to see it. I'm not saying it's going to be perfect right off the bat, but I do think as the season goes on and they get more and more reps and experience within the system going forward, I really think this defense is going to really become a top 15 type defense by the end of the year.
Will be interesting to see it play out. Corey, did you see, speaking of, I mentioned the schedule and the way it's set up, the 2020 schedule for Ohio State is really interesting because in addition to going to Oregon next year in the non-conference schedule, the middle of that schedule, the schedule makers did Ohio State no favors here, having in a 4-game stretch Iowa, at Michigan State, at Penn State, and Nebraska, and then having a few down weeks before ending against Michigan and Columbus. But that 2020 schedule for Ohio State is really interesting. And for people wondering, by the way, there's not some elaborate conspiracy against Ohio State in the Big Ten office. Nobody's sitting there saying, let's screw Ohio State. No, Big Ten makes their schedules. They're computerized. All they do is program in some parameters and then let the computer put the schedule together. So nobody came up with this, but it is a brutal schedule nonetheless, and I know it won't make Ohio State fans feel any better. Yeah,
you know what? This is what I say to it. Yes, it's tough at times, and I'll be honest, there's been times I've complained about it in the past, like 2 road games at Wisconsin, at Penn State, when they both came off byes in 2016 was kind of ridiculous in my opinion. But still, we are Ohio State. That's what you put up with. You get everybody's best shot. You got the target on your backs. Usually you're the king of the Big Ten. I maintain that the statistics show we've owned the Big Ten for at least the last 20 or some odd years. My opinion is it's tough, it's hard, but if anybody can handle it, it's Ohio State.
It's interesting because also in 2020, Alabama, who's had a perceived charmed life in the past as far as scheduling is concerned, in 2020 that changes a little bit because next year Alabama does play Georgia finally, which they hadn't. I can't remember how many years it's been, but it's been a long time. But they do play Georgia in the regular season, and then in November they have a road game at LSU, then their FCS opponent, and then they finish with at Texas A&M the week right before the Iron Bowl against Auburn. So 3 out of the last 4 games next year, Alabama actually has it pretty tough.
That is tough. I'll give Alabama and the SEC a little credit on that one. As much as we rip them, we have to give them credit when credit's due. At Texas A&M before Auburn is not a cakewalk. That's tough.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. Alabama finally getting a little bit of a tough go there in November, and down the stretch they're going to have to finish strong next year. So Corey, I want to ask you. So Bill Bender had an interesting article on Thursday on the Sporting News, and of course Bill was on the show last week here on Unscripted Ohio, previewing the season. And the premise of the article was interesting because basically he was referring to some of these non-conference games that we're seeing here in the future. And the reason they're being scheduled now is because athletic directors and the schools themselves are working under the theory an expectation that the college football playoff will be expanding here by 2026. So I'm curious your takeaway here, and with the possible news that that's where they're trending and that we will be getting an 18 playoff here in the near future.
If we get an 18 playoff, I think that's absolutely perfect. Keep it there. Don't keep adjusting it. I don't want to hear people complain, what about the number 9 team? Nobody cares at that point. 8 and 9 are so interchangeable, it doesn't matter. If your team is number 9, you probably lost 2 to 3 games. Do you really have an argument? So go to 8 teams. However you want to configure it, like round robins, whatever. Or just play at the home field of the higher rank the first week or what. I don't care how you'd want to do it. Just do it, because I think that way you're not guaranteeing that every team deserves to be there, but you're guaranteeing you got at least the 4 to 5 best teams in the country competing for the national title. I'm in love with the idea. Go to 8 teams, call it a day. We have the perfect setup for college football, and we get an extra week of college football. Which who's going to complain about that?
I agree completely, and I think one benefit of this is that if you go to an 18 playoff, you allow the chance to take all the conference champions, and then you can still have a margin for error and a room to take a couple of at-large teams. We're talking about teams that lost once or twice, and only to really good teams. Maybe they lost once in the regular season, didn't get a chance to play for the conference title. It allows you a little bit of wiggle room and a chance for a mulligan for a team that just misses. But you really do, I think, give more credence to the regular season because you're rewarding the conference champions and then having that wiggle room. And like you said, there's a difference between a team that loses once or twice and wins its conference but doesn't get in versus if you lose 3 times and you don't get in because you didn't win your conference and you didn't only lose once or twice. There's a big difference there, I think, for teams that are left out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to cry for a 9-3 Auburn at number 9, whatever it is. Look, Ohio State last year, you can argue whether or not they would have gone far in the playoff, but they were 12-1 Big Ten title champs, and they had one of the hottest players in the country at the time, and Dwayne Haskins, who I guarantee not only Buckeye Nation, but the country would have loved to have watched play against Clemson or somebody, and they were left out. Okay, you can say, well, I'm not saying Oklahoma didn't deserve it, mind you. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying they probably both deserved it, including Notre Dame, who's undefeated, including Georgia, for that matter, because they're extremely talented. And it's like you're leaving these teams out of it, and it's like Danny Cannell calls it, it's an invitational rather than a playoff at that point. Imagine a playoff adding those Ohio State and Georgia alone into that mix. I mean, my goodness, that is that college football fans dream of watching all these games. And you're not going to have a problem with revenue, obviously. It gets players more game film. It gets them in front of more people. It's beneficial to literally everybody. I understand the whole grades thing and everything like that. I do get that. If there's any way you could fixate it to allow the kids to focus on their schoolwork as well, then great, even better. But this is beneficial to everybody. I am all in favor of it. 8 teams, and then call it a day. From then on, we just make tweaks to the system rather than completely overhauling it.
I'm totally in favor. Should be a lot of fun. I hope that Bill is correct, and the athletic directors, some of the guys that he included in the story, I hope that they are correct, and that is the direction college football is going to go. Will we see an 18 playoff by 2026? Be sure to tweet at us at Scarlet Great CT. Hit up Corey. Hit me up at KYLam8. Corey, very, very much a pleasure. Glad you can join me again, and I'm looking forward to hearing you and Johnny Bullitt next week, starting twice a week.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. I was always crapping on the idea because I just like to play around anyway, but I'm actually looking forward to it. It's I love seeing the network grow and be successful.
And you're crapping on it because you're lazy.
That's true. I am lazy. That's indisputable. I can't argue that.
I can't blame you there. I'm very, very much lazy, and I'm gonna have to get over it and have to edit 3 times a week, and that's okay. Very, very excited, and I hope people will give us a listen. Starting next week again, you'll hear Unscripted Ohio Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. You'll hear Scarlet and Great Tuesday and Thursday. You'll hear Gridiron Game Time once a week, and starting the week after, you will hear Dog Days podcast with Chris Drew covering the Cleveland Browns. So a lot of great stuff coming up. Corey, again, thank you, and we will talk to you again soon.
Stretch runtime here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat. the latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
We are here with my new main man, Shane Larson, who is going to be the host of the Gridiron Game Time, new college football podcast here on the Unscripted Ohio Network starting next week. Shane, first, it's great to have you on this show. I was on your show last year, and it's great to have you on here and getting a new podcast started next week.
Man, I'm super excited, Kyle. Thanks for having me on, man.
I'm just as excited as you. We've been geeking out, nerding out about podcast stuff for the last half hour, and hopefully some of that excitement will come through here in our conversation. So Gridiron Game Time, new college football podcast, about 30, 45 minutes of college football talk every week. First, tell me a little bit about yourself. And, you know, people that aren't familiar with your work, you're obviously a podcast guy, and that's really exciting. So tell me a little bit about yourself and let people know who you are and how you got into this.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So, again, my name is Shane Larson. I'm actually based out of Boise, Idaho, so I'm on the other side of the country. I'm a Boise State alumni, so just getting a little preview. We might get a little bit of Boise State discussion in this podcast. I know some people might not want to hear that, but we'll give you a little bit of Mountain West, little Mountain West talk when we do this weekly podcast. But yeah, Kyle, I've been doing the Game Time Guru has been my show for the last 2.5, almost 3 years. And it's grown substantially. I just fell in love with podcasting, man. Sports media has always been my passion. And I've just been using this as a platform to be able to connect with different individuals within the sports industry. So I just feel like, I've grown a ton in this field. And yeah, like I've built connections such as, with yourself. I've been able to have you on the show and talk some Ohio State football, which was super awesome. Great show, and people loved it because, yes, I'm from Boise, but I'm a huge Buckeyes fan. So that's why I brought Kyle on the show. So, yeah, man, I've been here for a couple of years, and I'm looking to continue growing in this field.
I went into school for radio, and I took a long detour to get where I am now. I did some beat writing work in the past, and I did sales and done a little bit of everything. And, getting back into the podcasting, I know for me has been very therapeutic, but it's also been something that I really wanted to it's become a passion and something I want to pursue. And that's why this is really exciting to get the network going. For you personally, was there a time when you remember, when you started podcasting, was there a time you remember, hey, it's like, this is really cool. This is the direction I want to go?
Yeah, that's a really good question, man. So when I first started it, believe it or not, it was actually, I started the Game Time Guru just as a resume builder, because when I was in my final semester of college, getting my bachelor's degree, one of the local radio guys for Boise State football was in our class talking to us. And he just told me, he's like, yeah, you need to go home and start recording. So long story short, I just took his words and I was like, you know what? I don't have anything else on my resume for sports media, yet I want to be in sports media. How am I going to do that outside of like 2 years of internship writing for a website? Like I wanted to be on the radio. And so, I did some play-by-play announcing before, but like nothing like this, like a talk show. So I went home and I started recording, and it was just for that, just to build a resume. But then I'm talking maybe kind of like, I'd say about, 3 months into it, I was trying to be as consistent as possible. And I realized how much of a grind it is, but then I fell in love with that grind, the editing, the post-production, everything, and then producing and publishing that podcast, and finding new guests to bring on. And about 3 months into it is when I would say, I was like, you know what? I don't necessarily have to work for ESPN as a talk show host or a sports analyst to fulfill my dream. I can fulfill my dream another way. And that's when I was like, I'm going all in on the Game Time Guru. And that's what I did. I put all my focus in there. Obviously I have a full-time job, but my podcasting passion, that's when I decided I wanted to take it to the next level, and that I was doing it for the love of it, and I wanted to continue on.
So people are probably wondering, how does one become a Buckeyes fan out in Boise, Idaho?
Oh man, that's I get that question all the time. So, when I was in second grade, out here in Idaho, when we're on the Mountain Standard Time. So like, it's 2 hours behind Eastern. So the first games of the day start at 10 o'clock in the morning for us out here for college football, the early games. And so when I was in second grade, I'd always watch the 10 o'clock games, and it happens to be this team with these cool helmets, believe it or not, they were playing. And I was like, they were on the TV for like 3 weeks straight. And there was this running back named Eddie George. And I remember I turned on the TV, and Eddie George was running for a touchdown, and that happened to be the year he was going for the Heisman. And I just fell in love with Eddie George. I wanted to like be him. I wanted to be a running back. I was huge into football, obviously, my entire life. So like that was kind of my idol back then. And I just kept watching them because the next week they were on, and I'm like, I don't know who they are exactly, but they have these cool helmets, and everybody has a different amount of stickers on their helmets for different reasons. And then I came to find out why. And so, yeah, it just grew and grew and grew. And so like I was a huge Buckeyes football fan going all through, my my elementary, middle school, and high school days. But then, I obviously grew into just a major Ohio State fan. I actually wanted to go to school there, but it wasn't reasonable for me to go out of state and pay the tuition. But yeah, man, it all started with Eddie George. So when I went to the Ohio State-Oklahoma game in the shoe just 2 years ago, I wore my Eddie George jersey, and it was the first time I've been to Columbus for a game. So I was like, you know what, I gotta represent for where my roots are coming from, and so it was the Eddie George stuff, man.
I'm closing my eyes right now, and I'm visualizing the looks of confusion on their faces in your second grade class when you just randomly start shouting, Eddie, Eddie, Eddie. they probably can't comprehend what the heck you were talking about at the time.
No, they couldn't, man, and that's okay. That's why I think it's unique, man. I'm the Boise Buckeye, and I represent. Believe it or not, we do have some Buckeyes fans out here. We actually have a pretty big group of them out here, surprisingly, and they all meet together at the same sports bar every Saturday for the games. I've been there twice to go kind of meet up with them, but it's kind of cool to see the Ohio State, coming across the country, all the fan bases, because for the longest time, like I said, like all the way through second grade, I thought I was the only Ohio State fan in Boise. I had no idea there was other people here, but they actually do have a pretty good fan base here. But yeah, it was cool just growing up being like that, man. It was different. Everybody else was cheering for Boise State, which obviously I did too, but like they thought I was this crazy person because I liked Ohio State, but I stuck with it, man. Ride till I die, man.
So Shane, as we're just around the corner. I heard the stat today. We've got starting this weekend, we've got 20 straight weeks of college football coming with the extended regular season. Remember, the regular season this year is actually one extra week because of the timing, the way it starts. So there's actually 2 off weeks for Ohio State this year. So we've got 20 weeks in a row of college football, including bowls. So long season ahead. What are some of the storylines that you're interested in watching in college football, going into the 2019 season?
Sheesh, man. First off, yeah, it's exciting, man. Like any football fan's got to be excited right now. This is the best part of the year. I just love it. You just get excited because you know what's going to happen Saturdays. Get some of your stuff done around the house, and then you always know that there's going to be football on the TV in the background, or even if you're driving in the car, there's football on everywhere. So yes, it's exciting. But Kyle, I'll tell you right now, for anybody listening right now, some of the best storylines are the quarterbacks at the new positions. We're talking Jalen Hurts, who just got named starter over at Oklahoma, but Spencer Rattler was pushing him. That new freshman coming in from Pinnacle out of Arizona, came in and pushed him for the starting spot. So I'm curious to not only see how well Jalen Hurts does at Oklahoma, but to see if he has 1 or 2 off games, if Spencer Rattler gets some minutes and gets to come in there and get his reps. Because the one thing I always tell everybody, and maybe I'll talk about this on the new show, but Hurts is a stud, amazing athlete, but what he proved all the time was his inability to consistently throw the football, and that's essentially what got him to take the backup spot to Tua. And so I'm curious to see how he does, if he can figure that out and throw the ball consistently. But if he doesn't, we'll see if Spencer Rattler comes in and takes over. Again, football, the quarterback positions, I want to see how Kelly Bryant does. I want to see how, obviously, Buckeye Nation is looking at Justin Fields and seeing how he does. I mean, he's got some good competition behind him. He really does. And so we'll see how he transitions. And a lot of these schools, Kyle, another storyline is just like they're playing some bigger games. Ohio State specifically has some tough games at the beginning of the year. And, Cincinnati, and that's people are overlooking that. I don't think they should. I think Cincinnati's a tough game for Ohio State. So I like to see these big schools getting some tougher games early on. And I'm just, I'm excited. And specifically for Big Ten purposes, I want to see how Nebraska bounces back. I mean, they were ranked in the top 25 after having an atrocious year last year under Scott Frost for their first season. But I do think they are ready to roll. Scott Frost has a history of that. They went winless at UCF and they went undefeated under him. Like he knows how to change a program around. So I'm excited to see Nebraska, Ohio State, Nebraska. I think it's the 4th week of the season, September 28th. I'm going down to that game in Lincoln. So I'm excited to see where both programs are at there. Man, I could talk for days, Kyle. Sorry, I'm just rambling on, but I'm so excited for this entire season. I can't even explain.
Yeah, you mentioned the schedule. Corey and I were talking about this earlier. We're really excited about where college football scheduling seems to be trending. There's a little bit of a push for possible expansion of the playoff by 2026. And you look at all these games that are being lined up for 2022, 2023, 2025, 26. If they all hold, and they're still a long way down the road, college football by 2026, if we get that 18 playoff with all these non-conference games, it just could be absolutely amazing. And I mean, the only thing that college football has been lacking all these years is a quality start to the season. September has always been a snooze fest because nobody wants to play each other out of league, but that seems to be changing, and if that's the case, I think it bodes well for the sport.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny because I always think the first weekend of the season is always like the best weekend, and then the second week of the season always sucks. Because like the first week, and understand, I'm coming from Boise, so Boise State usually opens up against something big. This year, we're going to Jacksonville playing Florida State for the opener. Granted, Florida State is what they are. They are who they are right now, but that's a pretty much a traditionally like powerhouse program. And you also see some of the bigger games, Oregon, Auburn, stuff like that. You get these bigger matchups week one, and then typically week two is just like these cupcakes, and it sucks. So you get this hype to start the season and whatnot. I do feel that I'm right there with you. I think it's good. We're going to get a lot of these matchups consistently throughout the year. Does it hurt college football, though? That's another thing. Maybe I'll talk about this on the show, but I think some of these smaller schools, these group of fives that, and I know this is why I'm glad to be doing this show, because I can give you a different perspective coming from a group of five, school. I'm an alumni of Boise State, and I truly feel they can compete with other schools. UCF. I feel like some of these bigger group of fives might get hurt by that because a lot of these power fives don't want to match up with them. They want to match up with the big schools. That being said, I do think it's better overall for college football, especially if they expand the playoffs. And the one thing that we'll have to get used to is we're going to see a lot of multiple lost teams in the college football playoff. We will, and that's okay. It's okay to lose 2 games and still be able to make it when your strength of schedule is pretty much equal across the board. There's parity now, and it's trending in that way, and I love it. It's exciting.
You mentioned the quarterbacks, all the transfers. And this is another thing. Correct me if I'm wrong. I've been taking the stance here. I know people have their own opinions on whether or not waivers are good for college football, whether people should be sitting out. But I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around the ones that are saying the transfers are bad for college football when you have a Jalen Hurts starting for Oklahoma, you have a Kelly Bryant at Missouri, you have a Justin Fields at Ohio State. These are guys we would be seeing ride the bench this year if not for their ability to transfer. And I just can't, even if you're not crazy about the transfers, like this seems exciting for college football, right? It seems like we would want these guys to be playing earlier, and because they're better players and better talents.
Yeah, I actually saw your tweet about that the other night, and I started like going down this rabbit hole in my thought process of what I thought about it, because I see multiple sides to this, but I'm right there with you. Your statement that you just made right there, it's better for the sport. It's better for the fans to be able to see these guys on the field because they are good enough to play. They are good enough to start for good programs. And that's why they were starting for good programs. They just happened to be in a bad situation, not a bad situation, but in a situation in which they had somebody better than them in that position. And that's okay. That happens. You're not always going to be the best player. And so it is good to see these guys play. And I think it's amazing to have them be able to play. Granted, I do have some sort of like, if you're a coach and you're giving scholarships out to these kids and, you're building these kids up and you're working with them and you're trying to develop these players and they can just bounce for pretty much anything, it's tough. But I also see the player side of things. They want to play. But then you get caught in Tate Martell's situation and you bounce just because you got your feelings hurt because you couldn't catch a starting job, and then you can't get it again. And so you get put in these situations, and the coaches who are, putting their time, they're wasting a scholarship on you essentially because you leave. It's tough on the program too, because that scholarship could have gone to somebody else who would have utilized it and worked hard to develop. So I do see your point, and I totally agree with it. I'm excited to see all these quarterbacks, like having them. That's why I was saying one of those things is about being excited about college football is the quarterback positions. But I do, as far as the whole transfer portal and being able to basically have free agency in college football, it's tough. I think they need to have, they need to lock it down a little bit more. And I think a lot of that's going to come down to as well. Like this is another discussion for another day, but whether or not you pay the players, that's going to be another discussion. And I think that might also impact the entire situation on whether or not these guys are going to be transferring at will.
Shane, as we wrap up, let me ask you about Ohio State real quick, and we'll spend a minute or two on them. So, the Buckeyes are not by any means being shortchanged. They were number 5 in the preseason AP poll. I think most sports books you look at are going to have them 4 or 5 for the best odds to win, the national title this year. but still, you can't help but think that, you read all the clippings and some of the national media attention, and it feels like Ohio State is kind of a secondary thought, and some of that is deserved with Alabama and Clemson being the distinguished 1 and 2. But even within Georgia, Oklahoma, sometimes Ohio State gets lost in the conversation. Do you feel like they're being discussed enough? Do you feel like they get enough credit? Where are you with this Ohio State team as we head into the season?
Well, considering the way the media covered Ohio State this exact same time last year, I'm okay with them not being all over us right now, because all they do is hate on Ohio State, and it's so ridiculous. They put the horse blinders on and just go crazy on that university, and it bugs me. I think it's a beautiful spot for us to be in. I'm going to tell you this. Put us behind everybody else and let us do our thing. There's less pressure on Justin Fields. There's less pressure on Day as he's coming in to coach for the first time. And this program's going to have to take a couple of weeks to get their feet under them. So, yeah, that's great. I think it's great to be on the back seat this year specifically, because here's what I'll tell you. I don't feel confident that Oklahoma is going to go undefeated. So I feel like they'll slip. And so if Ohio State can just, find a way to get through their first part of their season and get their feet under them and get that system rolling, I think that's going to be perfect, because I think Clemson has a walkthrough for the year. I do not think that Alabama goes undefeated. I think Georgia can get them this year, and I think Oklahoma loses. I think Hurts is going to show what he's done before, and he's going to lose 1 or 2 games, and they're going to have a little problem there. And I think Ohio State's going to be right there, toying along for the entire season, and then they're going to break through and have their opportunity for the college football playoffs. So it's great. To me, I think just let them stay in the back and don't cover us too much. I don't care.
He is Shane Larson. He is the new host of the Gridiron Game Time here on the Unscripted Ohio Network. Shane, if you would, tell people where they can find you on Twitter, and feel free to plug your other podcast here real fast.
Oh, I appreciate that, man. Yeah, if you guys want to follow me on Twitter, it's at the Game Time Guru. I do a lot of my work on Twitter and on Instagram specifically. So at Game Time Guru on Instagram, at the Game Time Guru on Twitter.
Game Time Guru.
Yeah, the Game Time Guru. It's trademark now. So yeah, just find me there. And yeah, if you guys ever wanted to listen to my full show, it's the Game Time Guru. You can find me on any podcast network, just as you guys are used to. And I'm looking forward, man. The Gridiron Game Time is going to be a fun way for me to be able to discuss college football with the rest of you guys.
We are very, very excited about it, Shane. I appreciate you taking some time to come on here and introduce yourself, and I'm very, very excited about having you join. We're hoping that this becomes a big time, a big time opportunity for all of us, and I'm looking forward to growing it with you.
Yeah, same for me, man. I'm excited, and we'll make sure we bring some good content to all the listeners and help this podcast network, my man.
Gridiron Game Time coming sometime here next week. I'll have an exact day for you probably by Monday, so I'll announce that next week. Remember, I'm going to be on Unscripted Ohio podcast Monday, Wednesday, and Friday next week. Johnny and Corey will be on Tuesday and Thursday with the Scarlet and Gray podcast. And the week after, of course, we'll have the Dog Days podcast with Chris Drew debuting, covering your Cleveland Browns. Woof, woof. So very, very exciting. Make sure you check us out. We are on BuckeyeGrove.com, at least the Unscripted Ohio podcast is. You can hear all the podcasts on the Unscripted Ohio Network. That's on SoundCloud, Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. That's going to do it for me. I'm Kyle Lamb. You can catch me on Twitter at KYLam8. Have a great weekend, everybody. We will catch you next week.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.